So yesterday, the news was that Egypt had proposed the peace ceasefire. Israel had supposedly accepted it. Hamas had supposedly rejected it. And then Israel proceeded to continue bombing Gaza, and there was the first death of an Israeli. But let's be specific. And again, this is just reality. Okay, I think Hamas is a deplorable group on any number of levels. They are a terrorist organization. They repress Gazans. But they didn't just reject the Egyptian proposal. First, they have legitimate concerns about trusting the Egyptian government because this Egyptian government, the Al-Sisi dictatorship, the Sisi dictatorship, came to power in a coup that deposed the Muslim Brotherhood, who are the political parents, essentially, of Hamas. Now, again, think what you want to think about Hamas or the Muslim Brotherhood, but if you're dealing with people and you're dealing with people in real political and diplomatic situations, be aware of the context you're dealing with. Hamas has legitimate grounds to not trust this Egyptian government. Hamas rejected the ceasefire because they said, we don't just want a ceasefire, we want a different status on the ground in Gaza. We want to basically lift the blockade. So these are the conditions that Hamas outlined. Withdrawal of all Israeli tanks from the Gaza border. Free all prisoners that were arrested after the murder of the 3 Israeli youths that sort of sparked this latest outbreak a couple of weeks ago. Lifting the siege and opening the border to commerce and people. There isn't free movement of commerce and even medical supplies. Establishing an international seaport and airport which would be under UN supervision. Increasing permitted fishing zone by 10 kilometers because the fishing business among Gaza and Palestinians is severely restricted. Institutionalizing the Rafah crossing and placing it under supervision of UN and some Arab nations. International force on the borders. Easing conditions for people to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, prohibiting Israeli interference in the reconciliation agreement. That was, Netanyahu said, I don't have a partner for peace because the Palestinians are divided between the West Bank and Gaza and the PA and Hamas. Then the PA and Hamas struck a deal, and he said, I can't deal with them because Hamas is in it and they're a terrorist organization. That's what that's referring to. Reestablish an industrial zone and improvement of economic development in the Gaza Strip. Now, all of these solutions and conditions that Hamas has outlined, stripping aside Hamas as a group and what we think of them, but you have to do that in all types of political situations. You have to deal with who you need to deal with. The British needed to deal with the IRA. The IRA needed to deal with the British. Now, all of these conditions that Hamas has outlined are absolutely right. The siege on Gaza is a humanitarian catastrophe and a profound violation of human rights that's grinding out a population day in and day out. Not to mention the fact when the place is being bombed and civilians are being killed and children are being kept up all night and commerce, which is already utterly depressed, is even further deprived of oxygen. So when you see stories like this that just say, the irrational Palestinians have rejected a ceasefire, they don't just want a ceasefire because the status quo is unacceptable for them. And the status quo is unacceptable for Israelis who bravely continue to call for human rights and work on these issues. There's a movement in Israel in solidarity for the Palestinians. There's a lot of activity in civil society. But let's be clear about what we're talking about when you talk about rejecting a ceasefire. And as I always say, so I don't need to go into it in greater depth, there's a fundamental asymmetry of power here. And I think the narrative is starting to change in U.S. media a little bit. But look, on a broad human level, targeting of civilians, period, is a moral wrong, and it's grotesque, and Hamas employs those methods and has employed those methods, and so is Islamic Jihad, and it's disgusting and it's deplorable. But, if you want to be crude about it, just look at the body counts, okay? How many Palestinians have died since this conflict? Hundreds, right? Many civilians. One Israeli. We don't want anybody to die. We don't want any carpet bombing, and we don't want any rocket attacks. But the reality is that this is no equidistant conflict. And the Palestinians are not driven by an irrational hatred of Israel. They're driven by a desire to have self-determination, human rights, and the ability to live like everybody else is on the planet.